Hi guys, this is going to be a short introductory video to my new YouTube channel called Psychro. The aim of this channel is to use my experience from doing quite well in my A-level psychology course to hopefully help you guys out, and especially as the date now is about the 9th of March, as we move towards exam period and mock time, to help everyone out with their psychology revision and hopefully make sure that everyone gets those good grades when it comes to mid-August. So what I wanted to do today was give you a little introduction into kind of what my videos will be like, and I thought what better way to do this than to start off talking about social influence. Now, social influence is a topic that has befuddled many students, and it's the first one that you study most of the time in your psychology course, especially with AQA, and therefore as you're coming to kind of the end of year 13 now, you may be forgetting some of that information and that critical detail that you need in order to help you pass. And so hopefully when we go over that today, it should be a lot clearer. What bit of social influence am I going to be talking about? Well, I'll start at the very beginning and I'll talk about the types of conformity. So there are three types of conformity that you have. There is compliance, there is identification, and there is internalization. So compliance, identification, internalization. So what you need to know about these three things is what effect will they have on your public behavior, what effect will they have on your private beliefs, and what effect will they have on your short-term or long-term. So will they affect mainly your short-term, will they affect your long-term, or will they affect both to some degree? And also whether this compliance is governed by NSI, so normative social influence, or ISI, informational social influence. And I'll come on to that in a later video. So let's start with compliance. So very simply, what is compliance? So it's the kind of the weakest form of conformity where you kind of go along with a group just because they're doing it, you want to fit in, and there's not really much to it. In terms of public behavior, yes, it's going to change your public behavior, because let's say you're in a group of friends, you're complying just to fit in, maybe just this once, and therefore you'll go along with something, whereas maybe in private, you don't really believe what you're doing, but in public you're like, yeah, why not? So yes, it would encourage a change in public behavior, but as I've said, not necessarily change in your private beliefs. So compliance is usually just a very, very short-term method of conformity. You're only really doing it for one particular action or maybe one particular day, depending on the environment around you, and therefore it will change your public behavior, yes, but not really what you think. You're only doing it for short term. And that brings me on to short term, long term. As I've said, it's only a short term change. And as you think about what is NSI, so normative social influence, what is ISI, informational social influence, you can hopefully see that compliance is related to normative social influence. So just to kind of clarify that association, normative social influence is conforming in order to fit in, to be a part of the group, to not be rejected socially. And those are three key terms you need to use when you're talking about normative social influence. And that's exactly what compliance is. You're doing it just this once to fit in and to avoid social rejection. And this is why compliance would be a normative social influence change, or change influenced by it at least. So hopefully that's relatively straightforward in terms of compliance. But now we move on to the slightly trickier ones, one of which is identification. So what is identification? So let's say you're with a group and you're with a group who are discussing going vegetarian. So when they're discussing it, they might give some very, very good reasons why they'd like to be vegetarian. So you think, okay, well, let's go along with it. So you're kind of doing a little bit of compliance here. So let's go along with it for the day. Let's have a vegetarian meal at school, for example, and see what happens. So yes, when we're talking about changing public behaviour, that would certainly be the case. So it's definitely a change in your public behaviour, because maybe in private you wouldn't necessarily opt to go for a vegetarian meal, but on this occasion, because your friends are suggesting it, you'll be like, yes, sure, why not? Try it for a day. Now, identification differs from compliance in that it also affects a change in your private beliefs. So perhaps your friends are making a really, really convincing argument to you about why you'd like to go, why they go vegetarian, and maybe why you should. So essentially you might go, actually, you know what? it's not a bad idea. I might try this. So maybe when you go home, you ask your mum what's for dinner, and she says something that's a vegetarian option. Instead of being really, really disappointed, you might actually go home and say, oh, you know what, that's probably a good thing. So in terms of private beliefs, absolutely, it may change your private beliefs. However, is this a long-term change, or is it a short-term change? Well, in reality, something that is that is conforming by identification is largely doing it still to fit in with a group. So this will be more a short-term change. However, this differs from compliance in that it normally occurs within the presence of a group. So when you're back with that same group of friends who are vegetarian, you may also opt to go vegetarian with them when you're with them. However, when you're with a different group of friends, maybe when they eat some meat, you'll go and eat some meat as well. So it's not a kind of set in stone method of conformity, so you're not absolutely going to follow it for the rest of your life, but it's a short-term change that you're willing to kind of make in a group in order to still fit in. And therefore, this is why this type of conformity is governed by normative social influence, because you're doing it to avoid social rejection in the group. If everyone's going vegetarian and you're saying, oh, you might eat meat, maybe that may lead to you feeling slightly isolated from a group, and therefore you conform to avoid this. So this is what I'm saying here. It's a change in your public behaviour, it's a change in your private beliefs. However, it is most definitely a short-term change, and only really in that particular group that you made the change originally with. So as you can see, we're kind of increasing in the levels of conformity. We've gone from compliance, which is really just a one-off short-term change in public behaviour, to something identification, which is slightly stronger. So it's a change maybe also in your private beliefs, but still kind of within a group, and it's still really a short-term change associated with NSI. However, we're now going to move to the strongest form of conformity, which is internalisation. So if I said to you the word internalisation, what kind of comes to mind if something's internal? Well, essentially what it is you're kind of taking a belief that you've heard from someone, from a group perhaps, and you're really, really believing it within yourself. So you're taking that belief and believing it within yourself. So this is something that you may carry on for a long, long time. So let's go back to that example that I was using before. So you have a group of friends that want to be vegetarian, and you go into that group, and for that day you decide to eat vegetarian, and you listen to what their arguments are for eating vegetarian. And instead of doing what you do in identification and maybe just doing it in the presence of that group and perhaps changing your behaviour when you're with some other people, in internalisation, you really look at their arguments and you go, you know what, I'd really love to do that. That is something that is really, really speaking to me, and it's something that I internalise and I will do in the future. So that's the difference there, between identification and internalisation. Identification is a short-term change, typically within a group. Internalisation is a long-term change, and it continues whether you're with that group or whether you're not with that group. So you're internalising that belief. So let's go back to our checklist here. So does it involve a change in public behaviour? Yes. Does it involve a change in your private beliefs? Most definitely yes. Is it long-term or short-term? It's definitely long-term. And is it NSI or ISI? Well, let's have a little think about this. So NSI is, the kind of definition is conforming to avoid social rejection. So necessarily when you're internalising a belief, are you doing it to avoid social rejection? So when you go home and you turn vegetarian, are you doing that to fit in with a group? Not really, because you're not with a group in that scenario. You yourself are doing that out of your own volition. You want to go and do that. So it's not necessarily doing that through normative social influence. However, is it informational social influence? So informational social influence, to kind of break it down for you, is conforming in order to be right, to be correct, to follow expectations. So if you're sitting at home and you choose yourself to go vegetarian, you may believe that that is the correct way to do things. That is to follow expectations and to be right, and also to gain information. So when you go back to that example of being vegetarian, you may listen to the arguments of your friends and go, you know what, I think those arguments are correct, and I want to be right, I want to be correct in line with my friends, and therefore I internalise this belief going forward in the future. And therefore this is why this method of conformity, or this type of conformity, is informational social influence and not normative social influence. So if you're asked in a question, for example, to contrast and compare these types of conformity, mainly focus on these 4 factors. Does it change your public behaviour? So compliance, yes. Identification, yes. Internalization, yes. Does it change your private beliefs? Compliance, no. Identification, yes. Internalization, yes. Is it long-term or short-term? Compliance, short-term. Identification, short-term. And internalization, long-term. And is it NSI or ISI? Compliance is NSI, internalization is ISI, and identification is also NSI. So you won't really be asked too much more about this topic, rather than just contrast and compare. That's largely what you'll get. What you could also do is drop this into some of your 16 markers or some of your 8 markers when you're talking about studies like Milgram or talking about studies like Zimbardo, as these will be really useful. So I hope that was nice and straightforward. I wanted to start off with something that was relatively simple, and perhaps has awoken something in your mind from maybe year 12, or if you are in year 12 and you're learning this maybe for the first time, then hopefully that has explained it nicely for you. And always to use those 4 parameters that we talked about when you're discussing the types of conformity. And remember, this is types of conformity, not explanations for conformity. What are your explanations for conformity? That's NSI and ISI. Your types of conformity are compliance, identification, and internalization. So that's all from me for this video. Hopefully there'll be more to come in the future. Drop down in the comments below your suggestions for what you'd like me to cover, as I know it gets towards exam time. Students tend to prefer me to go over some things than other things, and that's completely understandable. Just to plug a few things while I'm here, I do offer some tutoring through the website superprof.com or .co.uk, and my name is Nathan, so if you search that up for a psychology tutor, you should find me there. I also do have an Instagram channel, PsychWrite YouTube, which I'll link in the description below, as well as the tutoring, and I should have the YouTube account up and running by the time this video goes out. So thank you very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon in the future. Bye bye.